Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the Weekend Edition. I'm not sure when he sleeps. Francois Guay is one of those people who always seems to be running at full speed. He's been a recruiter, a human resources professional, a board member, an entrepreneur, and most recently, he's the founder of a group called the Canadian Cybersecurity Network, a community, one of the largest communities of cybersecurity professionals, certainly in Canada and maybe anywhere. Community and support are essential to addressing two key issues in cybersecurity. First, there simply aren't enough cybersecurity professionals. Second, we're burning out the ones we have, often the most talented and the leaders in the profession. So community support and finding ways to encourage and develop talent are essential. And this affects us all. You've seen the impact of cyber attacks on our companies. In the past few months, our healthcare sector has been devastated by attacks on hospitals and clinics, paralyzing facilities in an already overloaded sector, adding to waiting lists, and sometimes delaying life-saving treatment. The attacks compromise our privacy as well, and our security. The largest health group in the U.S. was hacked a few months back. London Drugs, a major Western pharmacy chain in Canada, was taken down last week. These companies hold some of our most intensely personal information. And that's just one example of why we all feel the impact of this crisis. We did a series on civic infrastructure, and there are issues in government and, of course, in private industry, and we document them every day in our Cybersecurity Today podcast and on Tech News Day. So if this is what the attacks look like now, just imagine what happens if the shortage of cybersecurity professionals gets worse. Francois has taken that enormous energy to the cybersecurity community he founded. And now, in the middle of all of that, he's embarked on another project that he calls Cybertowns, an initiative to evaluate cities on how well they can attract and retain cybersecurity professionals. In the middle of all this, I managed to get him to sit for a few minutes for one of our shared weekend interviews. Welcome, Francois.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that introduction.
I gave a brief introduction to the Canadian Cybersecurity Network. And you want to talk about how you came to found that group?
Yeah, it was almost about 5 years ago, and I saw the trends with cybersecurity just growing, and some of the challenges, of course, that were taking place even back then were insurmountable. So I decided to focus 100% of my energy on the cybersecurity sector, and there was no national community. So I started that from the ground up and started with the number one member, first member, second member. And now it's over 40,000. It's close to 40,500 members all across Canada from every industry. And it's just incredible.
And you've just recently relaunched your website?
Yeah, we relaunched our website. Plus we also rebranded and have a new logo. We wanted the logo to represent our community, to make it more inclusive, to make it warm and welcoming. We see ourselves as connectors and collaborators, both for individuals, businesses, associations, and government. For us, it's all about connecting people so that we can solve cybersecurity challenges in this country.
Do you think I got the challenges right in the intro?
Yeah, I absolutely think you did. I think the challenges around education, the challenges around having enough cybersecurity talent, and aligning that to business needs and to the threats that Canada face is critical. And probably the biggest challenge that Canada faces is just the way we're set up. We're set up in municipalities, we're set up, most of our infrastructure is in the large cities. Then we're set up funding with provinces that are separate from federal funding, and education is also provincial. So part of that challenge is, how do you get aligned to negate that cyber threat that's becoming more and more prevalent across the country, but also across the globe?
Yeah, and Canadians beat themselves up on this. And I think it's true. We do have these divisions, the civic division, the province, the federal. Although in the U.S., they have the same thing. They have underfunded cities. They have states that are trying to do things, and they have a federal government. So I think we're all struggling with this. And how does your community help that struggle?
Yeah, I think the interesting part about it is we're the only community that really has individual members. So I think that's really important. The individual members of foot soldiers, right? So they're the individuals that are out there in the communities helping to stop cybersecurity or educate the masses around cybersecurity. I think that's really fundamentally important. Then we have the businesses. So we have businesses from all across Canada. The US, of course, is investing into the Canadian Cybersecurity Network as well. But those organizations are critical because they're offering the services to companies that have limited cybersecurity resources. So I think that's a really important play. Then we're very different because we support all of the associations as well. So again, organizations like B-Side, ISACA, Women in Cybersecurity, all these different organizations that are across the country can be free members of the Canadian Cybersecurity Network. And then on top of that, we do work with the universities and colleges. If you think of the universities and colleges, that's where the R&D takes place. That's where the students learn. That's where the businesses hire. And then governments are investing a lot of funding into the universities for cybersecurity and IT. So the universities are that what I would call the nucleus of cybersecurity in Canada. And then we do work on top of that with government organizations from across the country, both at the municipal level, provincial and federal level. So we're connecting and collaborating across all of these sectors. We're not trying to compete. We're actually just trying to bring everybody together. So a good example of that, Jim, was ICTC runs a competition called Cybertowns. I think it's one of the best competitions for cybersecurity talent in Canada. It's right at the high school level. They do competitions in the high schools, and then the schools that make it out of there go to the provinces and the regionals. And then they compete at the national level. And today, actually, they're competing in the finals. A couple of weeks ago, they identified they couldn't get enough funding, bring the students together to compete on one stage. So we were able to go out to the community and find funding for them. So that's an indication of how we help different sectors of the community by bringing it together, providing them with access to funding or sponsors, or just connecting two people together that can do business sometimes, or to find work for themselves. Really makes a big difference across this large country.
So you and your 50 staff members are busy all the time.
Yeah, I wish I had all that staff. We do have a really great board of advisors. We have a lot of volunteers that we used in the Cybertown report that we'll talk a little bit more about. And sometimes we do have staff for contract periods or for certain types of work that we do. But our team is very small, and I get asked that all the time. I said, how do you do all these things across the community by yourself or with a very small team? And my answer is always the same. I'm passionate about what I do.
And in the middle of all this, you found time for this new program called Cybertowns. So tell me, what is it?
Cybertowns, it came out from an initial conversation I had about a year ago. I was talking to someone from CompTIA, and they run a program in the US that's called Tech Towns. And I thought that was quite interesting. And that's across the whole IT industry. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting if we started focusing on cybersecurity specifically? And the reason why is because it's such an important need for this country. If we're going to protect the infrastructure and the resources and our quality of life, we need to protect this natural resource that is cybersecurity talent, because the countries that own cybersecurity talent are going to be the ones that are going to be in a better position. If we don't hold on to it, they'll slip off to the US or they'll slip off to Europe or other countries. And it's much more difficult to access those resources when you have a crisis. So for us, Cybertowns was a way to say, where are the best places to live and work in cybersecurity in Canada? And from that perspective, also, what are the communities doing that's so great to support those resources? And what could they be doing better to support those resources in those communities? And our methodology is a little different, Jim. A lot of surveys that come out or reports that come out tend to celebrate the big tech centers, right? They say, well, yeah, the biggest cybersecurity center is Toronto. The second biggest tech center is Montreal, or the third one is Vancouver. The reason ours is different is that it takes 60% based on statistical data from Stats Canada and other reports and looks at the quality of life in those cities. Everything from crime, taxes, amenities, growth. It looks at healthcare. It looks at a whole variety of different things So that's 60% of the score. And then 40% of the score was attributed to our survey that we've been holding since September. So we had close to 2,000 of our members take the survey. And then those two scores are meshed together based on the volume. And then a score comes out. And this is where the rankings come out. And this is where some of the interesting findings start coming out.
And you did an awards ceremony in Ottawa?
Yeah. So in Ottawa, it was informal. It was at the Canadian Identity Summit that was held just over a week ago. So I did an announcement first day of the conference and announced the results for the top 10 cities in Canada. So we just went through the top 10. We announced that our report would be coming out on June 4th, our final report where we detail all the 20 cities, but then provide access to all the cities that we also measured. So we measured cities that were communities that were above 100,000, identified as 100,000. So that was our threshold because we had to set it somewhere. And I think it's important that as communities grow, will they become part of that survey? And it's based on statistical data that we can access and rely on as well.
So tell me, who are the top cities?
Yeah. I think interestingly enough, I think one of the things that was interesting is there's some surprises in there. The number one city that came out was the city of Toronto. And I think before I go into more details, I'll go through some of the others and we can talk about anyone in particular. But Toronto came out first. A surprise came out in second, which was Edmonton. We know that Alberta is starting to grow the tech center pretty significantly. Their costs of their affordability is there is great. Those kinds of the reasons. But Edmonton has some great schools around cybersecurity, and it has a huge community now that's starting to thrive in Edmonton. Number 3 was Calgary. 2 of the top cities in Canada were based out of Alberta. Number 4 was a huge surprise. It was Winnipeg. And we don't think of Winnipeg as a cybersecurity center, but there's a lot of cybersecurity resources that work there because it's obviously the key city in Manitoba. It's got government. It's got a lot of infrastructure, and it's an affordable city to live in. Number 5 was Ottawa. Number 6 was Vancouver. Number 7 was Nepean, just outside of Ottawa. It has benefits, of course, because of Canada. Canada was too small to be ranked here. Number 8 was Victoria. Number 9 was Brampton. And number 10 was Halifax out in Nova Scotia. And just a couple of surprises I'll talk about because I think this is really interesting.
Please do.
Moncton came out in 12th place. Moncton, New Brunswick, right? So this is a really interesting thing. New Brunswick has been doing some amazing things around cybersecurity. We could have ranked Fredericton, but we had a lot of feedback about Fredericton. That's just under 100,000, growing cybersecurity crazy, beautiful place. And then the other major surprises was Saskatoon. Saskatoon came up extremely high. And again, that's a bit of a surprise. And when you start going into data, it's a little less of a surprise. And then we didn't see any top cities in the top 10 that were from Quebec. That was a huge surprise because usually you have Montreal coming out as number 2 or number 3, a cybersecurity center in Canada. And from a sheer volume and a sheer community perspective, that is absolutely true. They have an amazing cybersecurity community. But once you looked at taxes, the high taxes that were coming out of Quebec, you were looking at things like healthcare that they were being challenged on. In some of the cities, you were looking at crime rates that were a little higher. It really brought them down. And then the other major surprise was Kitchener-Waterloo not coming in. Kitchener, they're ranked separately, Kitchener and Waterloo, but they did not make the top 10 or even the top 20, even though they have a very strong cybersecurity workforce there.
What kept Kitchener-Waterloo out of that? That is a big surprise.
Yeah, it's definitely a surprise. I would say, Jim, that the big challenge out in those communities, again, where healthcare came out as one of the concerns out there. Affordability, obviously, is in the middle there. It's still fairly expensive, not as expensive as some of the major centers, but still fairly expensive. Crime rates were fairly high as well. And I'm trying to remember. Let me look at some of the data points here. But so go ahead.
We're going to get email on this, I'm sure.
We are. But if you look at statistical data that's come out in the past number of years, outside of cybersecurity, and you just look at livability in the cities, the results are the same. Okay. So some of these cities don't come out that high from a livability perspective in most major Canadian studies that have come out in the past. When you add cybersecurity to it, it just changes it a little bit. And I think what's really interesting about the demographics, we didn't do a lot of age demographic studies. So one of the things we're going to change next year is start digging into the different age groups, start looking at ethnicity, those kinds of things. Because I think what's really interesting, and a lot of feedback we had in the CCN survey, were specific to some of those groups being unhappy in some of those communities. Either because the community wasn't supportive of them, they didn't have enough services to be supportive in the community to be successful, or they felt that as either newcomers or individuals newly educated in the country, just graduating, there were no opportunities for them. There were limited opportunities for employment in cybersecurity in those communities. So I think our study is very different than others. And when you start looking at it, not as a popularity contest, but you start looking at it as livability, and you start looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective, you've got resources that are great and working in those communities that have been employed there for years, but then you've got a whole new group trying to come in that are studying in those larger communities, but aren't getting the opportunities. One of the challenges we've talked in the Canadian cybersecurity now for a while is we need to start treating cybersecurity as a trade. We need to get individuals that are coming out of universities and colleges and put them right directly into opportunities for them to start learning the trade. Because otherwise, companies are looking for 4 to 5 years of experience. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. We need to start getting young cybersecurity resources working when they graduate.
Yeah. And the U.S. is going to smoke us on this one. They've recently removed a lot of the requirements, at least for federal government, in terms of no longer requiring a university degree. They would take trade certifications and competence. And I think we overblow this sometimes in terms of, and I taught at universities. I'm totally in favor of a university education, but you don't need 4 years of university to get a starting job in cybersecurity.
Yeah. This is about competencies, and this is about learning on the job, right? So a lot of it is learning on the job. Give people the chance to actually learn how to do this work. And education is great. The more you have, the more certifications you have, the better. Okay. So nothing against that at all. We're very supportive of that at the Canadian Cybersecurity Network. We're just saying we want people to graduate, have to start working as a trade as they're going to school and then moving into the workforce. And we believe that is the way to start looking at it. We've got examples of that taking place in some cases in some of the countries. We've got great programs in some countries that are doing things that are very close to that. It's time for Canada to become a little bit more aggressive and give individuals that opportunity. And I think what we're seeing on the survey side as well is individuals just not feeling that they have the opportunity to be successful or to make a livable wage, even at cybersecurity in some cases in some of those communities. So I think there's a lot more things to dig into in Cybertowns 2025. And we're going to start working with some of these communities to help them retain and grow their cybersecurity workforces. I think there's huge opportunities for all of the people that are there. There's opportunities for Toronto to do a lot better. There's opportunities for every city and community out there to do better and attract resources. And I think the COVID and the remote work changed some of the parameters as well. So I think we started seeing, yes, we saw some people leave this big city and then come back to the big city, but there was still a core resources that stayed in some of those smaller communities and are building those communities up. So I think you're seeing it. You're starting to see people went out west. They went to places like Moncton. They went to places like Fredericton. The stats show it. Saskatoon, maybe. I think we're starting to see some of those smaller centers that are developing these resources. And there's some great livability in some of those communities and affordability. And the more people hear about them, there's an opportunity for those communities to grow some of that cybersecurity and tech talent because they're tied together. We bring cybersecurity resources to a community, they're going to have all the other tech resources follow as well, because it's part of the overall solution. I think I think the main thing that came out of it was a lot of communities have some great things taking place, but a lot of people don't know about them. So they're not being shared outside of that community. I'll take an example of there's the city of Ottawa as an example has been doing some interesting things. You've got Invest Ottawa. That's their kind of economic development side. And they have a place called just outside of the main core that's called XO. And they do some cybersecurity testing out there. That's more to remote sensors and vehicles and all those kinds of things. So they've got an actual testing kind of area, testing ground for these types of resources that smaller companies that can use them to verify where their product is at and everything else. So there's communities that are developing these types of centers where the competencies can be developed a lot further. They offer resources. I went in there one day and I was going like, wow, this is great. You can sit down, you can talk to other entrepreneurs, you can grab the free coffee. This is free coffee for people to come in and talk. And then there's a startup center right beside there. So you're talking to people that are building up these cybersecurity or other type of tech businesses. And then they have a hardware center, they have a software center, and there's conferences going on that are free for people and all kinds of great resources, but most people don't even know about it. So it's like, how do we do that at the Canada scale to start sharing those resources? So part of our report is about sharing some of those resources. It's about saying, here are some things that some communities are doing that let's celebrate these things beyond the city. Let's make it available globally. Let's make it available within Canada itself, because we can't continue to compete at a local level against each other. We need to start sharing those resources in the community.
I have to congratulate you on this. Many of these surveys or reports are pretty much, you don't learn a lot from them. And I think
right.
You've gotten maybe some look in the mirror type of things for communities that really need to improve, and some surprises from other communities.
To me, I think I look at all of these things as opportunity, right? So I find that there's so many great things taking place, and the cybersecurity community is amazing. Okay. And it doesn't matter if some communities came further down or came further up. The cybersecurity community is huge all across this country and is getting bigger every day. I can tell you that because their community is getting bigger every day. And we're finding more and more people that are in cyber, entering cyber. And I think we need to start coming together and collaborating. Like, I know you're a big believer in that, Jim. I know some of our advisors, we all believe this. This is why, we changed our logo into an interlocking kind of chain thing. It's all about connecting, collaborating. It's about security. It's about bringing people together and working together to build a better cybersecurity and a better Canada. And if we truly believe that, we need to start sharing the things that are working in each of our communities with others. Don't hide it from other people. Don't hide the good things that are taking place in your community, or don't not do certain things that you should be doing. So I think we need to start celebrating a little bit more flamboyantly about the great things that we're doing, but also sharing it with other communities. One of the things, I was on a call yesterday with MISA, and you're probably familiar with MISA, which is the organization here in Ontario around all the different communities. And they also were outside of Ontario. But we talked about, let's work with you and start sharing some of these things across MISA and across the various sectors you have across Canada, because we need to start getting these communities more deeply working together around the things that are important for them, because it's their infrastructure that's being targeted all the time, right? We can say that it's, Ottawa's the biggest area, but not really. It's the cities. It's the transit system in Toronto. It's the healthcare system in Montreal. It's these things that are being attacked, and we need to support these communities. And so we need to start right at that level, and then we can bring it all the way up to the federal level. And I think that if we do that by working with the various communities and making sure we've got enough talent in those communities and sharing talent across communities as well, I think we've got a much better chance to stay ahead of the threat actors.
I commend you. And this grassroots thing that you're doing and building from the bottom up and sharing, I think is exactly what may be needed as to be the glue that holds this together. This report is going to be interesting to a lot of people. When will the report be issued?
The report be issued on June 4th.
Right.
So we're just working away on it now, finalizing. The top 20 will be given more detail. And then all the other statistics and data will be made available as well. And we're going to identify those rankings. We're actually out right now finalizing, getting some sponsors, people, some of the communities that want to support their ranking or want to talk about some companies that actually want to be part of that celebration, I guess you can call it. So we're actually in the process of nailing those down and integrating it with the report as well.
Fantastic. We look forward to it, and we will definitely cover it on this podcast and on Tech News Day as well. But you can also be able to find it in your community. Just want to tell everybody how they can find your community?
Yeah. So just go to CanadianCybersecurityNetwork.com and about us, there's a place and you'll scroll down and you can find Cybertowns. So you can find the details there, the press release and those kinds of things. And you can also join us on LinkedIn. So there's a LinkedIn networking group, called the Canadian Cybersecurity Network. That's great for networking and just connecting with people that are in cybersecurity across Canada. Two great places to become a member, and businesses can become members. And like I said, all associations can come in for free as well. So we want to encourage more growth in cybersecurity. We're not charging people that need access to it that are just trying to grow their cybersecurity awareness.
So if you're interested, we'll post links to both of those groups in the show notes at technewsday.ca or .com, depending on, you can get there either way you want. My guest today has been Francois Guay. He's the founder of the Canadian Cybersecurity Network. There's a link to their site in our show notes. Thanks for coming in, Francois.
Thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
This has been our joint weekend interview for Cybersecurity Today and #trending. We'll do a little bit more of this over the summer. It gets Howard the weekend off sometimes, and me as well. I'm glad you could join us. We'll find our podcast and our show notes at our new home, technewsday.ca or .com. Take your pick. Howard and I will both be back in the news chair on Monday morning. Have a great weekend.